Presented by McDonald's of Glasgow, it's time for the Brown Sports Bag. From the heart of the Barrens, a weekly local sports machine. Alongside John Butler, here's your host, James Brown.
All right, we're back again this week, and we've got all kinds of fun things, I think, in store for everybody out there. John, welcome aboard again this week. Thank you for calling in.
Welcome. Glad to continue on.
Yeah,
Look forward to it.
I like to think that people like to hear our voices as a signal of comfort in these here trying times and whatnot. Some of them probably hear our voices and are like, "Are they back again? Have they not decided to just isolate them totally?"
No, we're still here. We're still going.
Yeah, that's right. And we're going to kick off this week's show. We've got a few things to talk about, as we usually do. Amazingly enough, we find some sports to talk about and things related to sports. And we're going to start off this particular show this week with some conversation about some, I would refer to it as speculation about the Major League Baseball season. And I think this speculation was generated out of a phone call, as I understand it, between the president and heads of major leagues in the United States, especially the NFL, NBA, and Major League Baseball. And part of the speculation that I've seen come out of that is trying to figure out a date when they could start the Major League Baseball season. And again, none of this is kind of public record. This is, as they say, sources. And part of that speculation was that Major League Baseball could figure out a way to start the season on July 1st. But one of the things that was a question that popped into my head, and that I also saw some questions related to this, was would that be like they kick off the season without any extra training that lead up to it in order to try to get in as many games as they possibly could in that, 3-month window? And that would be like one of the things that I thought, well, no better a question to ask than somebody who played baseball, especially at a higher level than John here. You know, how long it takes for a baseball player to really kind of get ready depending on their position, that kind of stuff. So what do you think would have to happen in order for them to even try to figure out how to start the Major League Baseball season?
Well, they're going to have some type of abbreviated training, whether it's preseason games or just being together for probably 2 to 3 weeks. It's mainly because of the pitchers.
Yeah, that's what I was saying too.
Yeah, building up enough arm strength and so forth. Because I'm not sure. I mean, I'm sure every player is going to be different. There'll be certain pitchers who will continue to throw during this period of time. They probably have access to do that, but you're going to have some others, probably some of the younger guys who may not have the facilities or whatever to do that. But it's the pitching mainly. Now the hitting will be behind, just because hitting is timing. But it doesn't take long for a hitter. Maybe 1 week for them, enough batting practice and things like that. It's mainly going to be pitching, and there's a lot of ways they can do it. If they want to just shorten it down to a week or two, then they're probably going to have to keep more pitchers on the roster.
Well, and I would also think one of the things they would have to do is, when it comes to the pitching, you mentioned they'd have to keep more arms on the roster to start with, and then the other thing, I don't know. They would have to go just straight into the season. I wouldn't see the point of having any preliminary games without them counting toward the standings, because you're gonna. Baseball is a team sport in some ways, and it's an individual sport in other ways. Individual in that a lot of the preparation is individual preparation. It's not like you have to know a great deal of play calls and sets that you have to run and all this kind of stuff. I mean, either you're out there kind of hitting and pitching, or you're not, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, it's the hitters are going to be behind, because the timing is a big deal with hitters, and they will be behind, especially if they don't get to face very much live pitching beforehand. That's just the way it'll be. But I think people are just desperate to see something, and if the players aren't in tip-top condition or they're timing down perfectly at the start, I think people will forgive them. They just want to see some type of competition and just something to take everybody's mind off of, watching reruns.
Well, and that's one of the things, too. We always talk about sports as the great escape from whatever's going around in the world, but sometimes sports itself takes over people's lives, and I mean fans, in such a way that it's kind of negative. But I would say that if Major League Baseball, even if it's July 1, if they could get back on the field and play, And even if this requires the stands to not be full of fans because maybe there's still some restrictions there, it's just that they've had the players isolated well enough that they feel comfortable with them getting back on the field. I would say that fans would probably be a lot more forgiving now than they've ever been about a lot of things.
Absolutely. I think people just want to see some type of competition. And I don't think the average fan even cares if anybody's in the stands right now. They just want to see They just want to see something on TV or whatever that's actually real right now to give them, give me, give us, some type of, distractions or happiness or whatever. And I don't care if there's nobody there, to be perfectly honest with you. I'd just be nice to see us getting somewhat back to normal. And I think baseball would be something that can be played. It's the one team sport that you don't see a lot of contact, unlike basketball and football, which there is constant contact with baseball. There's really, you talk about social distance, the only time you're close to each other would probably be the batter and the catcher, other than dugouts and traveling. I mean, that's the other thing, which I don't know how you work that out, but hopefully by July 1st, good gracious, that's a couple of months away. It's 3 months actually. You would hope that things would be much improved, and there's some signs here recently that things are starting to turn for the better. So I think July 1st would be tremendous. I mean, I'd take June 1st too.
Well, and that's one of the things you mentioned, the things turning for the better. I think we've been looking at this thing that people talk about, the curve and that kind of stuff, shortening the curve or lowering the curve or however it is that they refer to it. And one of the things about that is, this week, next week, we would like to see some trends in terms of infections and that kind of stuff with the COVID-19 virus. We'd like to see that curve decline. But the problem is that you can't also then get lackadaisical just because the social distancing and the things in place are working. They kind of have to stay in place until we know we're all clear, really.
I agree with that. And that's one of the reasons why I do not think it's probably going to be wise to have spectators there. And they may even have to think out of the box, and they may have to play, for the first month, all their games in Arizona or some hot weather state in which you kind of put everybody in, all the teams in one spot where they're not flying around and traveling around as well. That's another idea.
Yeah, I think we've seen that when they were talking about maybe the NBA playoffs, or trying to figure out some way they could do that where they could basically isolate the teams, and then that way they could play the playoffs, but it would basically all be at one location or two locations, depending on how the bracket is set up. Yeah,
and Arizona is perfectly set up for baseball because that's where half your spring training teams play. So there's plenty of fields and plenty. It's not like if you're not going to have spectators, it's not like you have to have huge stadiums.
That's right. And this kind of leads me to another thing where we've seen the KHSAA has not ruled out spring sports yet. They extended the dead period until at least May 1. But they've not said it's canceled. And some states around us have issued cancel orders for spring sports. I think Indiana and maybe Ohio have done so, but ours has not. And on the one hand, I'm kind of the mind, I'm like, let's not provide false hope. But on the other hand, I'm like, maybe this does work out. Maybe we've done enough here in Kentucky versus those two states I just mentioned on the early end that maybe we can figure out some way to at least have some sort of spring sports again, even if the fan involvement is restricted.
Yeah, I like it. I mean, I'm glad Kentucky has not rushed to judgment. And is it likely that is it more likely than not that they'll have a spring season? I don't know. It's probably more likely than not, but I don't. It does not hurt just to suspend until you get all the information, and pushing everything back right now to May 1st and then take a look, I think is a prudent thing to do.
Yeah, I mean, because what would happen basically if we wind up with a season that kicks off on May 1st, May 2nd, then especially baseball, softball, I mean, basically you're going to wind up playing a district schedule and maybe a couple of other games just to seed the district tournaments and then figure it out from there. Or maybe they just scrap the whole notion of the playoffs and just allow you to play a game a week or something like that. Anything probably to give the players an opportunity to experience the senior year.
Or just you play so many games, and then you'll just have a blind draw like you used to for who plays who in the district.
Yeah, that would be fine too. I mean, however you want to do it. I think I would say this is the thing. The critical point is not who has an opportunity to win a state title this year. That's not the critical point. The critical point is allowing these student athletes to have an opportunity, especially the seniors, to have some senior season.
That's correct, and it'd be nice, and that's it would be nice for not just those kids, but if they do get a chance to play, that also means that things are a lot better for everybody else as well.
Yeah, that's right. It's kind of the canary in the coal mine kind of situation, but not in a negative sort of way.
That's exactly right. So, I don't blame, the KSWSA for. In fact, I think they've done a pretty good job of this, to be perfectly honest with you. They've not rushed to cancel. They got caught in a spot at the girls' state tournament that, looking back on it now, you could kind of see they were struggling with what to do, but
yeah.
But the SEC's tournament did it as well, so it's not just like the KSWSA is the only one that had to make a tough call at the time, and they've kind of followed along not only with the health experts but the governor's wishes right now. So I really am not very critical of them.
No, I mean, for all the things that you and I sometimes beat the KHSAA over, beat them up over, this has not been one that we've been negative toward them about.
No, I think they've done a good job.
Yeah, and you mentioned the girls' state tournament. I mean, as we have discussed before, on that Wednesday, I think it was March 11th, the whole world basically changed when the information related to Rudy Gobert with the Utah Jazz and the NBA decision-making. I mean, and we had Bo Matthews in here, a couple of weeks ago talking about this. I mean, the world just kind of turned upside down for the decision-makers on that particular date.
That was it seems like that was it was either the icing on the cake or what instigated all the other cancellations.
Yeah, and so a lot of people in those 24, 48 hours made a lot of decisions quickly with the best information they had at the time. And honestly, before that Wednesday and after that Wednesday, I think most of the decisions that have been made have been spot on. I don't think if we would have waited any longer here in this particular state to make some of the decisions that we've made, we probably would be in much worse shape than we are, because we've seen some states around us who delayed another week or even 2 weeks or maybe close to 3 weeks, and their infectious rate is through the roof and their death rate is higher than ours. So I got to commend the KHSA, the health department, the Kentucky health cabinet, the governor. I think they've made some tough calls, and I know some people have been frustrated with some of them, but I think they've made the right calls to this point.
Well, one thing I know of that I'm sure of is I would not want to be the person making these calls.
No,
because those are really, really difficult to say the least. And there's not an absolute right decision, and but they're all tough, and there's cost benefits to every decision that has to be made right now. But I think overall they've done a good job.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, people like to give people who are in position of making decisions at higher levels a hard time about the decisions they make. But sometimes you and I, we go to the store and, we're like, what are we going to eat for dinner tonight? That's our toughest decision that particular day.
Yep.
And these folks are weighing much weightier decisions than that. And sometimes, I guess, we can disagree with them and we can discuss and disagree with their decisions. But hopefully they are the right people in the right place in a time like this.
I agree.
Well, this is the Brown Sports Bag brought to you by McDonald's of Glasgow. We'll be right back to talk about some college basketball players deciding they need to go to the NBA.
Presented by McDonald's of Glasgow, it's back to the studio with James and John, the Brown Sports Bag.
Well, John, it's, as I mentioned on the outro, it is that time of the year, 'tis the season when people decide they might want to leave college and join the NBA, I suppose, and get in on that draft, even though there's no season going on. And a few of those have come out of Kentucky, and today I think Jordan Nwora mentioned that, from Louisville, mentioned that he's going to jump in the draft. I didn't check out the specifics on any of these people, whether some of them are taking agents or some of them are just doing the old I'm going to test my draft status thing. But outside of, I would say Nuora probably will be a top-end pick. Maybe, I don't know.
I don't think so.
You don't think so?
No, I don't. I think he's pushing being a first-round pick, to be honest with you. I think his draft status kind of dropped at the end of the year, but if he goes in the first round, it's a good choice. If he doesn't, then it's kind of questionable.
Well, so I mean, do you think his offensive skills are probably not there to be an NBA player at this point? Or
he's streaky. I mean,
okay.
He's at one time I was for sure he's a first round pick, but his play, he got benched, near the end of the year as well, but. He's probably a late first round pick, but at one time I thought he'd be a lock, but I'm not absolutely for sure. And what makes it real tricky for all these guys right now is that it's going to be tough to figure out where you're going to be, because you're not going to have any of these NBA tryouts. You're not going to have any of these. You're not going to be able to fly and be worked out by these teams. For a while. I mean, you're clearly not in April and probably not in May, and it's going to be real tricky about what you're going to do. And you're going to have to. Some of these guys are going to have to live with the possibility that if they could be playing in the D League or overseas.
Yeah, it is kind of an odd setup for them, because what they better hope is that their advisors they had going into this year or into this process a few months ago were giving them the straight talk, for them to make these decisions. Because if they weren't, there are going to be a number of these players who will be declaring, and they're just going to be out in the cold, I feel like.
Probably, unless the NBA does something. I mean, it's possible that during this period of time, the NBA could change some of the rules, too. I mean, they could push the draft back.
Yeah.
They could, work with the NCAA and perhaps, changing some things about, if you don't get drafted, could you go back to, they could do some different things to make it where it's not such a hardship on some of these players. But a lot of these guys, that's their dream, is to go pro, and whether they're going to be first round or second round, they're going to go. And if they have to, go overseas, they have to go overseas. But playing overseas is kind of murky right now as well. This virus is everywhere.
Yeah.
And it's affected leagues all across the world as well.
Yeah, I mean, because a couple of those from Kentucky, Ashton Hagans, he said he was going to join the NBA draft. And, I mean, want to talk about a guy. We talked about whether or not Noira's offensive skills are good enough. I mean, Ashton Hagans' offensive skills just, on the look test.
Yeah, Noira is known as an offensive player. I mean, he's a great shooter. I mean, tremendous shooter and things like that. But his overall game it has suffered. Ashton Hagans is not a shooter. Only shot, I think, 25% from three last year, and had his issues at the end of the year. Had the confrontation with some of his teammates and Coach Cal, and didn't even play at the last game of the year against Florida. So, I don't think he's a first-round pick either, to be perfectly honest with you. I think Noira has a much better chance of being a first-round pick than Hagans.
Well, and the thing about Hagans is, I mean, he was critical in some ways to Kentucky's success this year on the defensive side of things, because he is a good defensive guard. But, yeah, you're right. I mean, when it comes to is he a good point guard? Not necessarily. Is he a shooter? Not really. So he's kind of a good college player in some ways, but much of his game is does.
Well, by the end of the year, the best player on the team was Quigley.
Well, that's exactly right, and that's, we've not heard his name in this draft prospects yet, but Tyrese Maxey put his name out there.
He did, and he's a definite top 15 pick. He's just 19 years old, and dynamic, and I think it's a pretty much a consensus he's a top 15 pick. So the question with Kentucky is going to be Richards and Quigley for the most part, and it's surprising that Nick Richards has not really had a mention about going pro, and he had a fantastic year, but the problem with Richards and some of these big guys is, the demand for these 6'9", 6'10" guys are not, as high as it used to be. Though Richards kind of reminds me of Montrezl Harrell from Louisville a few years ago, who's made a really good living so far in the pros, and Nick Richards is a much better shooter than Harold, and I could see him helping a team, to be honest with you. But right now he and Quigley and EJ
Manuel
has not made a decision, though. EJ Manuel's dad has kind of made. Is it Manuel or Montgomery? It's Manuel, and his dad has made some comments that he may not come back.
Well, and that kind of strikes me, going back to the Hagens thing and even the Manuel thing, because Manuel really didn't play, and he wasn't really in the rotation by the end of the season. That goes back to this. They strike me as, if they're unhappy with Kentucky, their better option is to enter the transfer portal than enter the NBA draft.
You would think, and so what you're saying makes sense. That makes perfectly good sense, and they could really use another year or two in college to develop their game, their shooting, and so forth. But there is I do think with these high caliber blue chip basketball players, there is almost a stigma that if you stick around in school too long, it's almost a stigma deal, and especially if you go to Kentucky,
right?
It's almost like this pressure to, if you spend more than 2 years, that you're a failure. And that's just not true. I mean, Nick Richards had a great junior year, and quickly had a tremendous sophomore year. So, but I do think there's this. Now, part of it is the stress too. If you have not played great, that you're going to be recruited over at Kentucky, but I do think a better option would be to transfer, like the kid, I think the Matthews kid did a few years ago, that went to Michigan and was tremendous at Michigan.
Yeah. Yeah, it just strikes me that with the way that the transfer portal has opened up these days, and I think that's got to be one of the reasons the NCAA has kind of loosened up how the transfer works, or entering that portal and allowing some leeway there, has got to be because you do have these players in the past that their option was, if they were unhappy with their situation, jump into the draft or, stay there and maybe lose their opportunity because, their scholarship's not really secure in any way, and the coach can make a decision that you're just not going to play. You don't fit the program in the way that you did when they recruited you, and so that was not a very
good. And players did not want to transfer and sit out. They want to transfer and play.
Yeah. And so, it's kind of like if I'm sure if your Coach Calipari and Hagens and Manuel are there and they're like, look, I'm not really happy with my role, and they discuss that with you, he'd be fine. Go ahead, go wherever you need to go do what's best for you.
Well, yeah, but from a college coach's perspective, they just want. I think what most college coaches they want to know.
Yeah.
What are you going to do? Because that will give them an opportunity to replace you through either recruiting or through the transfer portal yourself. What's going to be interesting is how long are these coaches going to wait for these players right now who are kind of on the fence about what to do.
Well, and in the coach's position at the moment, they can't really go out and recruit as they would usually.
No, they can't. No, they're not allowed to recruit. They can call and do all the online stuff, but their recruiting looks like to me the visits and things like that normally occurs in April, May, June, July, when all this stuff kicks in, is going to be tremendously different this year. Maybe better for them. Maybe they actually have to go back to the high schools probably where they should be in the first place.
Yeah, you know what? There are always changes that come out of a circumstance like this, and there are a few things that I see that could be positive. And you just mentioned one of them that I think could be positive: the reconnection between the college coaches and the high school coaches, where sometimes college coaches like to complain that a high school coach is always going to try to sell their player to you. But I think most good high school coaches know where their players can play at the next level if they can, and they're not going to put their player in a position, if they care about them, to go somewhere and fail.
That's correct. It's no different with an AAU coach. I'd say most AAU coaches are going to overdo their player as well. But yeah, the high school coach, when I first started, I can tell you, I would get phone calls from various colleges consistently over players.
Yeah.
And it was not the AAU, influence back when I first started. And when I was about at the end, the AAU had just taken off. And you can see AAU has done a lot of good things. It's given people a lot of opportunities and kids some opportunities to go on and to show their skills. But you can also see with a lot of the FBI investigations that has gone on the last couple of years, there is an underbelly to AAU and to some of these shoe companies that run a lot of the AAU circuits. It's not pretty.
Yeah. Well, to change gears real quick from people from players to coaches, on the women's basketball side, I think there was a shocking move when Vic Schaefer left Mississippi State and is going to Texas. I mean, he built Mississippi State into a women's basketball powerhouse. His recruiting was top notch. I really did not expect him. I didn't see that move coming.
I was shocked, to be honest with you. Now, there's something about Texas that is a tremendous draw for coaches.
Uh-huh.
I mean, clearly that they've been a football school for years and years and years, but this draw of Texas, whether it's the men's basketball or women's basketball, has just been an incredible draw. I know they have almost unlimited resources, but Mississippi State, Vic Schaefer, he took Mississippi State from a program that I never even heard of in women's basketball.
Yeah, it was the third best D1 program in the state behind Southern Miss and Ole Miss.
Yeah, and they went to back-to-back Final Fours,
mm-hmm.
Lost on the last-second shot to Notre Dame once. This guy has done an incredible job of recruiting, mainly homegrown talent in a lot of ways.
Yep.
They lead the conference, I believe. I think they surpassed Tennessee in home. Well, they're second in the conference to South Carolina, but they average, 7,000-8,000 a game in attendance, and they got a tremendous following. I was really, really surprised. And plus, the SEC is overall probably it's a better basketball conference than the Big 12. After, Baylor has dominated that conference for the most part.
Yeah.
But I was very, very surprised. I don't know if it was money. I don't know if he saw talent starting to leave, but they were really good again this year. I was very, very surprised. He's done an incredible job. And now Texas, I will say, Texas, back when women's basketball was first starting back in the 80s and the late 70s and 80s and things like that, Texas at one time was a powerhouse, but they have not done a lot in the last, I'd say, 15 years.
Yeah, I think the thing I do wonder if two things probably happened. I wonder about two things. I wonder if he looked around and, as you mentioned, he said, I'm having a harder and harder time recruiting out of the area where I've been recruiting from, because, as you also mentioned, a lot of his talent was coming out of Mississippi, Louisiana, Alabama, Georgia. I mean, it was deep South talent he was getting, and I'm guessing some of the other SEC programs maybe have been picking up their recruiting just to try to compete. And he looks over there at that conference that Texas is in and says, really, all I've got to do is get Texas close to where Mississippi State is right now, and we have a chance in that conference, because outside of Baylor, there's no real dominant team over there.
There's not right now, no. I mean, Iowa State was good for a while, and Texas used to be good, to be honest with you, but there's not a dominant team in the Big 12. Outside of Baylor, Oklahoma has been good, but, Baylor has dominated that conference, and I'd say he got a pretty good bump in salary. There's no question that Texas has funds that Mississippi State doesn't have.
Right.
And that could possibly be, I'm sure that was a role. I would say he had a significant pay increase.
I was going to say the other thing, too, for him as a living situation, Starkville is a fine little town, but it ain't no Austin, Texas.
No, and I don't know where he's from either. I mean, he's not. I don't think is he from. I mean, you're a Mississippi guy. I don't know if he's from Texas or not. I should have researched that, but But I would say money has a lot to do with this move.
Yeah, I think he has ties to Texas. I don't remember if that's where he's originally from. He may actually originally be from Arkansas.
Okay.
But, he may be in that Texarkana area of Arkansas, which I would say means he's got, Texas ties in some way. But I would say, your point about the money probably has a lot to do with it. I'm sure Texas threw everything they possibly could at him because they typically do when they're trying to get.
Well, there's not a lot of $1 million coaches in women's basketball. I mean, to be perfectly honest with you, the salaries are lag behind the men, so Jeff Walls is one of the highest paid in the country, and of course Gino up at UConn. But I would say they threw a pretty good sum of money at him.
To answer your question, he was actually born in Austin, Texas.
Yeah, okay. Well, I think money and going back home has a lot to do with it then.
Yeah. I hate that for Mississippi State. It'll be curious to see who they manage to get as a coach because, once you have success, I'm sure it's easier to lure a decent coach to your program, and maybe that person can come in and continue the run.
Maybe. Yeah, I agree with that, but when oftentimes at programs that just spike in terms of success when they don't have a long history of success, you can also put a lot of that on the coach. When the coach leaves, sometimes it's difficult to replicate that.
Yeah. I would say one thing they should do, maybe they should hire his daughter as their new head coach, Blair.
Well,
I think
that's a possibility.
Yeah,
she's awful young, though. She's only, I think, been with him 1 year since her playing time.
Yeah, that's right. But hey, we've seen it successful before, and we've seen it fail before.
That's correct.
Back real quick on the women's side, and we talked about the men's college basketball. With the women, we don't see these opportunities to necessarily leave a program and enter the draft portal. I think we've had just a couple of underclassmen who have declared early or left early and gone to the WNBA. And so the seniors out of this particular group this year, I wonder how many of them have an opportunity to go and play in the WNBA, and how many of them are going to be hoping to continue their careers because maybe they feel like it ended prematurely.
Well, the women, the basketball was not granted an extra year, though, right?
That is correct. And we'll talk about that in the fourth segment, as a matter of fact.
Yeah, they were not granted another year. It's one of the reasons why the women have not left early for the draft as opposed to the men is mainly due to money. The WNBA just does not pay the salaries that the NBA does. The game is not followed near as well at the WNBA level as the college level, and oftentimes it's in a lot of the women's best interest that to get their degree actually oftentimes is more beneficial to them than maybe the financial benefits of going pro.
Yeah, and you're right. The lure just isn't the same, and that's why I kind of wonder if some of these who maybe, and I don't necessarily mean they would go to the WNBA, but maybe they go overseas and play where they didn't have a finality or a closure to their careers. And so they're looking at an opportunity to maybe continue to play maybe a year or two just to scratch that itch or something.
Could. That may be. But oftentimes with over time, when you eliminate your emotion and start to think about it, that oftentimes leads to a better decision.
Yeah, you're right about that. And with that, we will take a break. This is the Brown Sports Bag, brought to you by McDonald's of Glasgow. We'll be right back.
Presented by McDonald's of Glasgow, it's back to the studio with James and John, the Brown Sports Bag.
Well, John, in the absence of, sports, we do have sports news in the sense that we have some area high school basketball coaches who in the last week have let everybody know that they are stepping down from their jobs, at their present jobs. We don't know, what they're going to do next. And they're all three pretty significant from what I saw. The first one I noticed was Derek Clubb, the boys basketball coach at Bowling Green. resigned, and then we saw Blaine Embry, the boys coach at South Warren, resign, and then Joe Hood, the girls coach at Warren Central, resign. And I think I say Derek Clubb is the most shocking because everybody's coming back next year. You would expect them to be the front runner to win the 4th region next year. But they have had 3 consecutive years where they won the district tournament and then lost in the regional final to Warren Central, so that's got to be a wee bit shocking for them. But I just really thought he would come back next year with that group and see if they could knock off everybody again next year.
Yeah, that was I can't say that I'm 100% shocked, but that job at Bowling Green is definitely a top 20 job in the state, and you could argue it's a top 10 job in the state.
Mm-hmm.
And they've had a tremendous success at Bowling Green, especially in the last 10, 15 years. And, Derek did a really good job. I mean, it's really tough to take over a program that you're expected to win. And, I know Derek fairly well. I mean, and his family goes all the way back when I first started coaching at Barron, and we knocked off Warren East in 1997 to win a regional title. And Derek's sister played on that Warren East team, and what I remember about that is his family was very, very nice after the game, and his dad, was very complimentary of us and so forth. And I still remember that to this day.
Yeah.
How generous he was, even though he was heartbroken that his daughter lost, but he was very, very nice to me and had some very nice things to say. So, Derek mentioned in the paper, I think he's trying to get his rank 1, and, he's got a family and things like that. And I wish him the best. He did a really good job. But oftentimes these jobs are tough jobs. When you take over Bowling Green, you're expected to win, and you're going to get criticized no matter where you are. You can be at the worst program in the state, and you're going to get criticized.
Right.
But you're going to get criticized even at a different level when you're at Bowling Green, and they've been beaten in the finals of the region 3 straight years to a really good Warren Central team.
Yeah.
And I can make the argument that Warren Central was probably the favorite the last 2 years. And Bowling Green beat them in the district final, but Warren Central came back and got them. So, I know it was. I'm sure it's a tough call for Derek, and I'm sure he's, like any coach, had taken his fair share of criticism and sleepless nights and so forth. But whoever takes that job over will inherit a team that will be the clear, undisputed, I'll say, favorite to win the region.
Yeah.
And I would argue a top 10 team in the state to start off the year with all 5 starters back and led by Isaiah Mason.
Yeah, one of the things I thought about when I was reading the club's comments and why he stepped aside, and you mentioned the rank 1 and the family and this kind of stuff. Very often whenever a coach steps aside and they mention family at this time of the year, I think, yeah, whatever. But under the present circumstances, I finally thought to myself, that may be a real thought to him right now, and I just don't generally believe that.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, it could. I mean, I believe what he said. Is rank 1 and family and things like that. But I also just know as a coach when I got out too. I also know there's also stress and pressure that goes with it as well. And I can imagine, and I don't know. I've never talked to Derek or whatever. I would imagine there was, it was internal pressure just from within. There may be some other type of pressure as well. When you get to that final game and you lose to your rival, I know that has to eat at you, and it's tough to do. But he did a good job. I can tell you that. It's not easy. People think it's easy. When you have talent, and you take over things like that. It's not always easy, and there's a lot of stress with it. And I wish him the best.
Yeah, and also, one of the things that you mentioned, taking over a program like Bowling Green, I mean, he took over when they came off of winning a state championship, And I'm sure once that happened, everybody thought, well, we're going to be back next year and next year and next year, within the school system probably and with the fans. And the interesting thing, too, and you and I have actually discussed this before probably when they were playing in the state tournament 3 years ago, Bowling Green's fans do not show up for their games very well, but there does seem to be a lot of pressure on the coaches there.
Well, I think there's expectations, definitely when you at Bowling Green. I think there's expectations. I don't know if there's specific pressure or not, but I do think there's a culture and expectations to do well there. And he did do well, but whether it's basketball, whether it's football, whether it's baseball, they've had such a great history of success and so forth. And, it was a situation that was, I never really... I just thought it was a tough job to take over. I knew he had to. He was the assistant coach, so it was natural for him to take over. But those are always situations where you're always, to me, as a coach, reluctant to take those programs over because it's almost a no-win situation.
Well, and sometimes it may be even worse if you are actually on the staff of the previous coach because the players and everybody kind of know you in that assistant's role, and when you step into that head role, you kind of have to change your frame of mind as a coach, I think.
That's exactly right. It's a totally different game when you go from the assistant to being the head coach. And you're looked at differently, and you got to make tough decisions, and it's not always the smoothest transition.
Yeah. Now, the other two coaches, they didn't surprise me as much because Blaine Embry stepped down from the South Warren boys. And I kind of, Blaine's basically at retirement. He can go do whatever he wants. And I kind of felt like he had taken over the South Warren program, not for the long term anyway, but to kind of get the program stabilized and on the right path.
Yeah, Blaine's been doing it for 30 years and is a great coach, great guy too. And, started his success at Warren East and built Warren East girls into a state power, won several regions there. Got out and took over went to Western and became Mary Taylor Cow's assistant for years and did a good job.
Yeah.
Took over Greenwood boys, and he's the only one in this reign of Bowling Green Warren Central for the last, seems like 20 years. He got Greenwood to the boys state tournament, so he's won regions in girls and boys.
Mm-hmm.
Then retired and came back and did the girls. Started the girls program at. We didn't start the girls program. I'm sorry, at South Warren. He took over. He was the second coach at South Warren.
Yeah.
And did a really good job with them. Got them to the regional tournament. I think 3 straight years, and then turned that over to his son. And then he took the boys job for 2 years, but. I think Blaine, talked about his wife had some health problems and things like that, and he just thought it was the right time to step away. You never know until you do it, and he's still young enough and he's still respected enough that if he decides to get back in, then he will be somebody that people will be interested in.
Yeah, I would not be the least bit surprised that when people found out he was resigning from that job, he didn't get phone calls from people saying, "Are you for real done coaching, or are you ready to start already again?"
Yeah, and South Warren is another job, in Bowling Green. It's obviously it's the newest school in Bowling Green. They're successful, and just name the sport, and they're pretty successful. Obviously football, baseball, softball. They've been good at so many things. The one area where they've not had the success of the other programs is boys basketball. And a lot of it has to do, they're in the same district with Warren Central and Greenwood. Yeah. But you still have to think over time it's a program that will eventually break through in boys basketball.
Yeah, and then in the case of Joe Hood there at Warren Central, I thought Joe, last year he was battling his medical issues. This year he came back, and I thought he did a really good job.
Oh, he did a great job this year. And no coach has gone through what Joe has gone through. He comes from a really good family as well. And, battling back from cancer and so forth and what he went through. And then picking up the program the program has just really struggled in the last, 6-7 years. They just lost so many kids and had trouble with numbers. And then all of a sudden, started, getting the young kids involved again, and this year they had tremendous turnaround and got some big wins as the year went on. I think knocked off Warren East, knocked off Greenwood a couple times, and Joe was instrumental in that.
One of the things that – go ahead.
Well, Joe's just, and again, he talked about getting his rank one as well. He talked about playing more golf, and, he was a tremendous golfer, in high school. I mean, I don't think he's talking about when he's talking about playing just some more golf, just going out there and just hacking around.
No, he's a qualified potential professional.
He's at a different level than most people.
Yeah. Real quick, one of the things that I wouldn't be surprised we see in the next couple of weeks, and it may just be on hold, this is the time of year when we usually see a lot of switching over in teachers and coaches and coaching positions open just because of the contract. It's that time where you're trying to fill your teaching slots. School district as well. It's time when they're trying to make decisions about who's going to be teachers at schools, and a lot of times that affects the coaching positions. So we may be kind of in a frozen in amber at the moment, so I don't know how that's going to impact the back end here when it comes to coaching changes and that kind of stuff.
I agree. I mean, April and May is generally in high school when you do see the changes in the coaching, and also you see teaching changes, with pink slips and things like that. But we're in a time right now that's we hadn't seen. So I don't know how that affects it. I don't know if that means people are just going to wait and decide later, or maybe this is just going to be one of the years that very few people get out.
Yeah, that's right. Well, this is Brown Sports Bag brought to you by McDonald's of Glasgow. We'll be right back.
Presented by McDonald's of Glasgow, it's back to the studio with James and John, the Brown Sports Bag.
Well, John, last week's show, they were on the day we were doing the show, they were doing the vote. The NCAA committee was voting on how they were going to handle the spring sports and the senior eligibility and that kind of stuff. And we made a couple of predictions, and apparently we basically nailed it.
Well, surprise. But anyway, we did get one right.
Yeah. Hey, I'm glad they listened and made their choices based on listening to the show.
That's exactly right. That's right.
But, yeah, they basically what they did was they are allowing an extra year of eligibility for the seniors in spring sports, but it is up to the institutions how they will fund that, whether they will roll forth the scholarships or not fund it, or, it's going to be up to the colleges and universities themselves how they actually handle that year of eligibility.
So you get another year, but it's not guaranteed you're going to get any money.
Yeah, and I think that was the only way they could really make that decision, because otherwise you were going to put these universities budget-wise in some very tricky situations that I'm not sure they could have fulfilled anyway. Yeah,
and the Ivy League has already said that we're not allowing any of our athletes to seniors to take that extra year.
Yeah, and I don't know. They have some different kind of constraints, I would guess, because
it's called academics.
Yeah, because of academics and just well, and I mean it's all private universities in the Ivy League, right? So I mean there are no public universities.
I think that's right.
And so they kind of have their own set of rules that are not governed by. I mean they're related to the NCAA, but they're not governed by the things that are usually attached to scholarships and how you have to deal with some of that money.
Yeah, you're going to have some grad transfers from those schools, though, who would love to probably play somewhere.
That's a good point, and that's another thing I hadn't really thought about, but that's something we might be looking at, come June, July.
Well, I think Duke just got the best player of that conference.
Yeah. Well, it seems like a reasonable transfer to go from Harvard? Well, it was Yale, right? Was it Yale?
Yeah, I believe that's right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, to Duke. I mean, if you're going to go from Yale and you're going to go to grad school somewhere, I mean, Duke's a pretty good choice if you're.
Yeah, I agree with that. But yeah, it's the issue that schools are going to have to deal with, and our local school, Western Kentucky, is going to have to deal with it as well, is the financial cost of what you want to do. From a coaching perspective, it's going to be interesting in terms of how you're going to manage the increase in rosters with. If all your seniors do come back and all your recruits do come in, then you're going to have a rut of people on the roster, and in today's time, it's hard to keep them happy as it is, that's going to be another interesting issue.
Well, and that also leads to the letters of intent that people may have signed, and now they're staring down the barrel of will they get the playing time they thought they would, where they were going. I mean, now you've got to deal with those incoming players and what decisions they need to try to make.
Yeah, because a lot of freshmen, when they come in, are picking schools that they think they can immediately play in, and their spot that they thought may be open may not be open right now.
Yeah, so I guess what we're getting at here is I'm happy the NCAA made this decision for these seniors if they want to have this opportunity and they want to take advantage of it, but don't think this is not going to be a messy process on the back end of this in a few months.
It will be, and a lot of and I read some articles on some of the senior softball players who lost and who love to play softball, but this is it for them because there's not much of a professional softball afterwards, and they've got to make a choice to go on with their lives. They have jobs waiting for them, or to come back and go to grad school and play another year of sport they like.
Yeah, that's right. So it'll be interesting. John, thank you for joining us. Once again this week, it's the Brown Sports Bag, brought to you by McDonald's of Glasgow. Hit their drive-thru. It's still open.
Thanks for listening, and be sure and join James and John once again next Monday at 4 for the Brown Sports Bag, a local weekly sports machine presented by McDonald's of Glasgow.
Coming soon to your FM dial, this is Fox Sports Radio, WCDS Glasgow, AM 1230.